She buried her mother at sunrise. The ground was cold and hard, the kind that made even prayers sound brittle when spoken aloud. Iana's hands trembled as she pressed the final mound of earth, the taste of dust and grief thick in her throat. No one from town came to help. They never did. Her mother had been the healer everyone turned to in secret, but too native, too other to be mourned in public. When the last shovel of dirt fell, Iana stood alone beside the grave, her turquoise shawl heavy with dew and silence. Somewhere in the hills, a crow cried once, then vanished. She walked back to the cabin her mother had built. One room, 2 windows, the scent of sage still clinging to the walls. Everything inside whispered of loss. The herbs hanging from the rafters. The clay bowls by the hearth. Even the wooden comb on the table, still holding strands of her mother's hair. Iana sat beside the small fire and watched the flames bend like tired dancers. She tried to remember her mother's voice, soft, deliberate, always sure, "Your worth is not theirs to measure." But the words felt distant now, blurred by time and betrayal. Because it wasn't just death that hollowed her, it was the memory of Thomas. The ranch hand with sunlit hair and promises that burned out faster than they were spoken. He once told her she was beautiful, said it like a secret too dangerous to be true. For months she believed him. Believed that love could soften the line between what she was and what she was told she could never be. Then one afternoon he left for town and came back with another woman's arm around his waist, smiling as if Iana had been a season easily replaced. That was the day she stopped looking in mirrors. In the weeks that followed, her life folded into quiet routine. She sold herbs at the market, kept to herself, learned the rhythm of solitude. Yet, every glance from the townsfolk carried the same unspoken question. What made her think she could ever belong here? She'd grown skilled at pretending not to notice, at holding her shoulders straight beneath their scrutiny. But nights were harder. Nights brought the sound of the wind under the door, whispering his name like a cruel refrain. It was on one of those lonely evenings that the stranger rode in. Iana noticed him first by the steadiness of his posture. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who trusted the land beneath him. His horse was pale with dust. His eyes, when the light caught them, were the color of old tobacco leaves. He stopped at the well near her cabin, dismounted, and nodded politely before asking for water. She hesitated, then handed him the bucket. His fingers brushed hers, rough, warm, fleeting. He thanked her softly, voice low like distant thunder. No swagger. No appraisal. Just presence. For a long moment they said nothing. The air between them felt different, not charged, but alive. He introduced himself simply, Caleb, a traveler, newly hired to a nearby ranch. He asked about the plants drying on her porch, curious about their purpose. She explained, feverfew for pain, sage for cleansing, yarrow for wounds. He listened with an attentiveness that felt foreign, his gaze never drifting. When he left, she found herself standing at the doorway long after he'd disappeared into the dusk. Days passed, and the pattern returned, chores, silence, market, home. But now, sometimes, she'd see him in the distance, tipping his hat as their paths crossed. Once he helped her gather fallen baskets after the wind knocked them over. Another time he left a bundle of wildflowers by her steps. Not roses, but desert blooms, uneven and honest. Each gesture unsettled her in ways she didn't understand. One afternoon, while she arranged herbs at the market, Thomas passed by with his new wife. He didn't speak, just smirked. The laughter that followed him was sharper than a blade. Iana froze, the old humiliation rising again like smoke she couldn't clear. And then Caleb appeared beside her, handing over coins for the herbs she hadn't realized he'd picked. He met her eyes and nodded, quiet, steady, unbothered by the whispers around them. It was the smallest act, but something inside her cracked open, releasing years of clenched breath. That night, alone by the fire, she caught her reflection in the kettle's surface, distorted, uncertain, but still hers. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Not the outcast, not the abandoned woman, but something else entirely. Hope frightened her more than loneliness, yet she couldn't shake it. The next evening, as the sun bled across the plains, Caleb stopped by again. He asked about her turquoise shawl, said its color reminded him of clear skies after a storm. She looked down, fingers tightening on the fabric, voice barely a whisper. "Don't call me pretty. I'm not pretty enough." He paused, studying her face as if memorizing it. Then, softly without looking away, he said, "Maybe the world's been blind too long." The words lingered like the echo of a prayer she hadn't known she needed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Only exposed, fragile, seen, alive. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere in that quiet tremor between day and night, something began to change. She didn't know yet whether it was healing or danger. Only that her heart, long silent, had started to stir again. It began with shouting. Rough laughter spilling from the saloon, followed by the sound of glass breaking against wood. Ayanna froze where she stood, basket clutched tight to her chest. She knew that voice. Thomas, drunk again, his cruelty louder when the night hid the shame. The townsfolk didn't stop him, they never did. His laughter carried through the street like a blade scraping stone. Caleb was there too, sitting outside with a cup of black coffee, watching the chaos unfold. He didn't interfere until he heard her name. Thomas stumbled from the doorway, eyes mean and red. "There she is," he slurred, pointing at Ayanna as if exposing a sin. The medicine girl who thought she was worth a white man's promise. The men behind him chuckled, their shadows long in the lamplight. "You're still trying to be one of us, ain't you?" he sneered. "No one's fooled, sweetheart. You were a pastime, not a choice." The street hushed. Even the wind seemed to stop. Ayanna's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Her pride had been buried once, she wouldn't bury it again. She started to turn, to walk home with what dignity she could salvage, when Caleb's chair scraped against the dirt. "That's enough," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Thomas squinted at him, surprised. "This your business, cowboy?" Caleb stood, brushing dust from his coat. "Not my business. Just not right." The silence that followed was a living thing. Thomas spat near Ayanna's feet, then smirked. "Careful, friend. You don't want to be seen protecting her kind." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe I don't care who's watching." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Thomas laughed, a bitter, hollow sound, and stumbled away with his companions, muttering curses swallowed by the dark. Ayanna couldn't speak. Gratitude and anger tangled inside her, gratitude that someone had stood up, anger that it had to happen at all. When Caleb approached, she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." "Maybe," he said softly, "but I couldn't pretend I didn't see." That night, the wind turned restless. Clouds rolled in from the west, dragging thunder in their wake. By the time Ayanna reached her cabin, rain had begun to fall in silver threads. She lit a candle and sat by the window, watching the storm swallow the plains. For the first time in years, she felt something shift. Fear, yes, but also a strange sense of being defended, as if the universe had finally drawn a small circle of light around her. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, nearly drowned by the rain. When she opened the door, Caleb stood there, soaked through, his hat in his hands. "You left this," he said, holding out the small pouch she'd dropped earlier. His voice was gentle, apologetic, almost unsure of whether he should have come. She took it, fingers brushing his. The contact startled her. Not the touch itself, but the warmth it left behind. "Thank you," she murmured. He lingered on the threshold. "You shouldn't have to face them alone." "I've been alone my whole life," she replied. "It's safer that way." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. Safe isn't the same as living. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm pressing against the roof. She could feel her heart trembling, uncertain of what it wanted more, distance or the comfort of his presence. Something in his eyes made her chest ache. He wasn't pitying her. He was seeing her, without masks, without shame. Her defenses cracked. The words slipped out before she could stop them. I'm not pretty enough, Caleb. Not for your world, not for theirs. He studied her face as though memorizing it. Maybe the world's been blind too long, he said again, the same quiet conviction that had startled her once before. Beauty's not what they tell you it is. It's what still shines after the world tries to dim it. Tears burned her eyes. The candle between them flickered, throwing light across his jaw, his hands, the gentle steadiness that seemed carved into him. He reached out, hesitant at first, then rested a hand against her cheek, not claiming, just understanding. You deserve to be seen, he whispered. Not hidden. She leaned into his palm, trembling. The walls of her solitude began to crumble, not all at once, but enough for warmth to slip through. 4 years, she had measured herself by rejection, by the eyes that looked past her. Now, under the hum of rain and thunder, she felt something entirely new, acceptance that didn't need to be earned. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't the embrace of possession but of promise. The storm roared outside, the world dissolving into sound and light, yet inside that small cabin everything stilled. His heart beat steady against hers, grounding her in a rhythm that felt ancient, inevitable. She wanted to tell him she was scared, that she didn't trust happy endings. But all that came out was a soft sob, and his arms tightened just enough to tell her she didn't have to explain. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled through the cracks of the shutters, brushing her face with warmth. Caleb was gone, leaving only the scent of rain and the faint echo of his voice in her mind. You deserve to be seen. Outside, the plains stretched endless and bright. Ayanna stepped onto the porch, the world glistening around her. For the first time, the silence felt kind. Somewhere in that quiet, she realized the ache in her chest wasn't sorrow anymore. It was something rarer, gentler, hope, reborn and trembling like dawn itself. And in the distance, faint but certain, came the sound of hoofbeats returning.